I know, we got to get that professional grade mics. All right, let's put it right here. I'm going to move this so we can get audio.
Am I munching in?
That should be good. All right.
Should we close the door?
Yeah, we should probably close it. If they get here, they'll know. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Grace St. Paul's Youth Podcast. Episode 5, I believe. Could also be 6. We missed last month because we had a lot of illness and just a lot of craziness and hectic stuff going on. So we're back, November. Yeah, it's a cold, blistery day, and we'll go around in a circle and say everybody was here. So I'm your host, Christian, and we have Colin. Lila's here. Danny, and our special guest, Ben, Father Ben. Garren is here. Woohoo! So very excited for this one. Father Ben and I met a month or two ago and talked about what we thought would be a good idea for the podcast, being talking to many spiritual leaders in the community and asking them similar questions just to get their different ideas and theological perspectives on a bunch of different topics. So, yeah. So with that in mind, I guess we'll start and we'll just quickly say, how our week's been, or month, depending on how much we can remember that amount of time. So I will start. I was sick a few weeks ago. It seems like COVID is going around again. It seems less bad, but more easily spread. So be careful out there, everybody, especially as the weather gets colder. And then we'll go this way. How was your week or month, Colin?
My week's been pretty good so far. Just been kind of busy, but aside from that, it's been good.
Yeah. How was your Halloween?
Just kind of happened. Didn't do too much, to be honest. Just kind of had some. You know how my mom bought in some candy? Apparently, she had one extra bag, and so I just had some of that.
Oh, nice! There we go. Yeah, that's a win for us and a win for you too. Did you dress up as anything for?
No.
No. Yeah. Yep. All right, Lila.
My month, it was pretty good. Nothing too exciting. I had homecoming. That was really fun. But the guy that I went with didn't dance with me.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
It's fine. I just danced with my friends.
There you go. That's what you got to do.
Oh, yeah. Halloween was pretty fun.
Did you have fun at trunk or treat?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I tried to get Michaela to go around multiple times.
For candy?
Yeah. And she was like, no, it's fine. I'm like, girl, literally, all of these people bought way too much candy. You gotta go around and get them all.
Mm. What were you guys dressed as?
Michaela was a skeleton, and I was a Viking.
Yeah, that was cool. Where'd you get that prop sword from?
A spirit.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
And then I tried to, because in the theater thing that I'm doing, there's sword fights because we're the Three Musketeers, and I was like, oh, this would be a great sword that we could get because Spirit, obviously after Halloween, is having a huge sale, so we could just get a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But it was the wrong type of sword.
Oh, because you need
You need these ones, and this one was a two-hand fight one.
Yeah, that wouldn't have worked. Totally different fighting styles.
Totally not a plug, guys. Okay, so the live theater on December 14th and 15th, they are having the Three Musketeer play featuring me as Porthos. So
nice.
Get your tickets.
Good plug.
Oh, yeah.
And where's it at?
The live theater workshop in Tucson.
Cool. Nice.
Oh, yeah.
All right, and Dan.
My month has been good. I'm super grateful for the nice weather today and that I get to wear my warm hat. And I helped my sister get ready for homecoming yesterday, and that was really fun.
Nice. Homecoming season.
It's homecoming season.
Mm-hmm. All right, Father Ben.
It's been a busy month. We had diocesan convention, which was huge, and some work leading up to that. And then in and around campus, we've been having a series of mini retreats, one of which every month we had a mental health first aid training on campus this last month. And next weekend, we are heading up to Prescott for the annual Young Adult on Campus Ministry retreat. So that's just lots of planning and conferences and bits and pieces of work on the weekend.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Nice. That's a beautiful time to go up to Chapel Rock, so
yes,
that'll be fun.
There's never really a bad time to go up to Chapel Rock.
That's true. That's a good point. I haven't gone in the winter, so we're planning a youth gathering up there. I think February is when it's going to happen, so there should still be plenty of snow.
Yes.
So that'll be fun to see. I've only been there during the summer, but yeah. All right, well, let's just dive right into it, because we have a lot of questions we want to ask you. And so, Father Ben, starting with ECM, Episcopal Campus Ministry, can you tell us how long you've been involved and just a little, maybe a description of it and how it's run?
So I've been with the Episcopal Campus Ministry at the University of Arizona for a decade now.
Wow, congrats.
The ministry started, we're getting close. We're not quite at our 100th year. We're in our 90s right now. And it started off as a group of laywomen here in Tucson who were really wanting to make sure that pastoral care for the students were happening. And then they also started organizing clergy to regularly come in and do worship there. And we sort of maintained that. So our first priority is always just general pastoral care and support of students on campus, regardless of whether or not they are Episcopalian, in hopes of just fostering diversity, inclusion, and retention programming on and around campus. But then we are the Episcopal Campus Ministry, and one of our overwhelming goals is to make sure that any student on campus that is looking for Episcopal worship, Episcopal formation, or trying to just figure out whether or not the Episcopal Church is a good fit for them, has that opportunity readily available on campus without having to, hike the mile to here at Grace St. Paul's or the mile to St. Andrews or figure out a car or a public transportation way to one of the other churches in town. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's definitely, that's an important research for especially kids who, don't have transportation methods, because our public transportation, it's better than Phoenix, but it's not great. So that's awesome. Thank you for doing that. What have been some of your favorite memories or events that you've done with ECM that you can think of?
I can think. Critical things that we do is things like, the retreat that's coming up every November. A lot of it is just getting, oftentimes, Episcopal students, they show up to, university. We have maybe 200 students at the U of A total that come from some sort of Episcopal background. And that can be, I think the church I go to with my grandparents that my mom requires me to go to at Christmas when I go home is called Episcopal. I don't know. Two people who show up who have had a really long, good, positive history of the Episcopal Church. They show up knowing and looking for the Episcopal Campus Ministry and want to be active and involved their entire time here. And so it's that sort of huge gambit. So when we look at things like the retreat we're having every November on Veterans Day weekend, or the conferences and retreats we have for campus students and young adults that happen on the province-wide, it's like sort of the entirety of the West Coast. Yeah. Like what's really critical about that is you just get a whole bunch of Episcopal college students and young adults together and just really just have some fun information and some prayer time together. But those are always just exciting because we start making connections that then become like lifelong friendships that people know that they met And especially if they keep working and going about life in the church, they'll see again at conferences much later in life. Yeah. So those have been really good. I think another key thing, like a major memory that's like prescient for right now, is 8 years ago, we were looking at sort of the first time where we were looking at a possible Trump election. Yeah. And the stress around that with a lot of students, both in the sense of what they feared might happen under a Trump presidency, but also more pressingly, generally, is what that meant for like how family politics would be come Thanksgiving dinner. And so that was actually the first time where we normally at Thanksgiving, we say people are here, we want them to go to one of the parish Thanksgiving suppers on Thanksgiving Day, meet some people, have some chance to do some intergenerational stuff. But that was like the one Thanksgiving at the campus where we just sort of said, no, we're having a very specific sort of Friendsgiving that has a lot of LGBTQ and marginalized student focus. That like it's just anyone, if you know someone who needs a place to go who's not going home because they're stressed out to go home, come here and we'll have a space. And so we did that. And that was like another just sort of like a lot of times with campus ministry, it's like people say, well, why didn't you do that every other year? I'm like, well, because it was completely contextual to the very specific needs of students that 1 month. Yeah. And we've had a lot of really cool programming. We had this amazing theology on tap programming for like 2.5 years. And we were getting people to come together and we would buy nachos at Gentle Ben's, which is one of the big sort of bars near campus. And people would get whatever they wanted to drink. Most people were just getting sodas, etc. And we would just talk theology and philosophy. And then everything stopped one semester. And I found people like, what happened? And what happened was that a lot of the core group that was coming needed access to either to various rooms and studios on campus, either for music practice or for computer programming like CAD work. And the hours switched. And so the hour where we were having this event was no longer readily available to like 2 core groups of people. Wow. And so little things like that have nothing to do with how great the programming was once. And I always sit there and say, I can plan something and I can have 25 people show up, and I don't know if that means I'm going to have 0 or 100. Yeah. So, but yeah.
Wow. Danny and I were in college when the first Trump election happened, and I think that would have been a nice resource. We were up at NAU. That just would have been a nice resource to have at that time to be able to decompress with other people and talk about the ramifications of what that meant. So thank you for providing that. I want to talk a little bit about Beloved in the Desert.
Okay.
So what is your role in that, and how did you become involved?
So Beloved in the Desert, which is sort of in, I want to say we didn't shut it down, it's not shut down entirely, but it's in a resting phase right now. A lot of ministries, especially youth and young adult ministries, we just have times we have to rest. Yeah. So Beloved in the Desert is part of an amazing program of the denomination Episcopal Church called Episcopal Service Corps. And Episcopal Service Corps has been around since the late 90s, sort of in its earliest versions, but Episcopal Service Corps was started in the 90s. And I was part of Episcopal Service Corps when I was in 2005, 2006 now. And basically, the Episcopal Service Corps is an opportunity for young adults, generally people who have finished college, 2 years out of high school, have done something significant elsewise, and are like in a stage where they need to discern next steps. How are they going to integrate whatever else they're doing into a meaningful, disciplined life where they're really aware of who they are, what they're doing, what their calling is. And some of the Episcopal Service Corps placements we're very, very Episcopalian, and some are very much sort of general spiritual self-care, wellness, health, and discernment based. And so they're all across the country. And basically, almost all of them, you live together in intentional community. So it's not just having roommates. And in the midst of that, you're placed at various nonprofit volunteer placements in the local community, the vast majority of which have to deal with some issue of social justice and community organizing. And that can be very direct. For instance, helping out at a homeless shelter every single day, making sure that things get cleaned up and things are well. And it can be very sort of macro level of I'm working on a campaign to help with water safety and cleanliness in this watershed. And it just depends on where you're looking and where you're going. Beloved in the Desert was here in Tucson for 5 or 6 years. It was just one iteration of Episcopal Service Corps. And I started working with them to help with sort of these big questions of, we know we do social justice community organizing work. We know as Christians, we're supposed to be doing something like that. But there might be this question of how do I integrate the specific work that I'm doing with refugee ministry right now to an actual express theology based on the Bible of why this work is something that is meaningful to my life as a Christian, as an Episcopalian, as a person. And so I came in really to sort of do some teaching and hopefully some exploration of getting people to connect this idea of social justice community organizing is good. My Christian faith is good. I'm supposed to be doing social justice community organizing because I'm a Christian, but how can we get that deeper? How can we make that integrated? How can we really look at the history of community organizing and the history of Christianity and really sort of look at how they integrate? And then in the midst of things, for about 2.5 years, I was also the program director for Beloved in the Desert. And we did a lot of good work during those times. The program had a lot of people go through who are now really active leaders, both in the Episcopal Church, but also in the greater community far away from the Episcopal Church. And like a lot of things with, as I say, campus and young adult ministry, everything has its time. And the question is it responding to the specific needs that the young adults are coming to us right now with? And it just became really clear that having this space in Tucson wasn't a express need that young adults were coming to us with. And we can redirect ministry and energy to other things right now. And that'd be really useful. And there's a lot of reason for that because Episcopal Service Corps historically has responded to the fact that for decades, the Episcopal Church wasn't that great at helping people in their 20s discern calls to ordain ministry. And also in the late 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, there was a lot of people who weren't readily able to find a job right out of college, but they might not have huge amounts of student debt sort of in the midst of their space, and they had maybe a little bit more breathing room for a gap year. And need to find something to do. And that sort of, that pressure, a lot of those pressures are no longer sort of like the pressures on young adults now, which are huge, are different. And so there's this question of how can we respond to that? And that's a question we're having, the Episcopal Service Corps is having on a denominational basis. But in the midst of that, still having some of these amazing programs that are happening. And as an alumni of Episcopal Service Corps, in the Diocese of Arizona, where I have a bishop who's an alumni of the Episcopal Service Corps, if you're in your 20s and looking for a year to explore, to discern, to ground, and to center, the Episcopal Service Corps is a great opportunity to do that.
That's awesome. So. Yeah, that's a really great service. What are some of the outcomes you've seen from students who do participate in the Episcopal Service Corps?
So I think it varies all across the board. One thing that happens is, a lot of times people you go from high school, your home family, college where you meet some diversity, etc., and but you can still sort of isolate yourself or keep in place sort of the mindset you had, and you haven't necessarily discerned deeply. And you haven't sort of had some rubber hit the road moments between the way you always think things are and how things might actually be. And I always tell people, your family of origin can be good, it can be bad, it can be ugly, but you're going to be leaving them with some preset notions that might be great notions for you to have your entire life. But until you've learned to actually articulate them, to own them, to know why you do them, and not just by instinct respond because that's what your parents always said and it works for you and it's good, and that can all be very, very true, until you can do that on a non-instinctive level, until there's some real sort of depth and discernment, why this is how you want to live your life, and why this thing that your mother or your father or your parent taught you is so cool and so good for you. There's going to be a little bit of disconnect. Mm-hmm. And so what happens with Episcopal Service Corps when it works well is it helps all the members integrate and become aware of where there's some catch-ups to do, where there's some learning to do, where there's some self-discovery to do. And really, no matter where you end up post that, if in the midst of Episcopal Service Corps year, some self-discovery has happened. And one of the key things that we try to do is create a very safe place so that if there can be fallout, hopefully it's the best place for there to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a mental health break right now. And I'm surrounded by people who actually want to hopefully pastor support me and be guides in the midst of that. I had a lot of, I had to realize deeply I needed to process a whole bunch of stuff when my Episcopal Service Corps year. And my Episcopal Service Corps director was really helpful in orienting me towards a really good therapist and doing a lot of self-care stuff that was integral to everything else I ever did in my life, and integral to this day, some of the support and stuff I've had there. From the Episcopal Service Corps, people go on to lots of things. As I said, one of the sort of initial sort of things we sort of did was help people who were called to ordain ministry, who were in their 20s, who were sort of getting a whole bunch of pushback from their home diocese. We gave them a place to really actively do that, to have an internship where they would be in the midst of working for a church for their entire time and preaching and leading liturgy and doing all of these things. But we also have people who come in who are not Episcopalian. They're not interested in converting to Christianity. They want to be in a supportive community, and they're getting a chance to work with a certain nonprofit. And this is an entryway into working with a nonprofit they've always been interested in working with. And so they might go on to not be Christian, but to be a really solid worker for that nonprofit and get a job with that nonprofit and be in our communities, really serving. And this is an entryway point to sort of, have a year where you try that on. We also have had people who've come in who, they finished their undergraduate or their master's degree in something they thought they were going to love, and they get to the end of it and like, I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life. We give them a gap year where they say, try something completely different. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they sit there and say, wow, I'm going to completely reorient my life. And other times they say, oh my gosh, I miss the laboratory. Bye now. And it just depends. And I don't want to sit there and say that like a successful Episcopal Service Corps year is a completed year where someone is all polished and ready to go to seminary. A successful Episcopal Service Corps year could be readily encountering some major mental health stuff that needs to be really processed, leaving the program and going and getting the help that you need. Both of those are completely successful ministry ventures and things that the Episcopal Service Corps does. And looking at one as a success, the church says, oh, look, we've got a new ordained priest, and the other one as, well, here's someone who is stable and on disability and working healthily within what they have and where they need to be for their health and wellness. Both of those are equally successes of ministry. And I think a lot of times when we say, what's a great Episcopal Service Corps year look like, we want to hold up what they want and sit there and say, well, there's a lot of ways that the Episcopal Church is fostering young ordinations. That's really, really amazing and solid. how many ways is the Episcopal Church catching just a handful of the young adults who need intense pastoral care, who need the church to be there with them as they're encountering some mental health issues or some physical health issues that might need lifelong care, and being there at the start to orient them to handling that well. And so it's one of those things I always sit there and say is, hey, we have to, if you can't register how both are successes, then your approaching to how this ministry works is wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think having those preconceived ideas of what makes a successful youth program, young adult program, being in terms of indoctrination into the church or growth in the church in a pastoral sense. Yeah, I completely agree that that's not the point of our ministry at all.
Well, I mean, one of the things that the Episcopal Church is trying is what is non-coercive youth ministry? What is non-coercive evangelism? What is a Christian spiritual life that doesn't have coercive elements to it? And I think even on a very positive, like not in sort of a super negative way, but a lot of churches that I fully align with their politics, I fully align with everything. Like there is this, where like, and I think that there's a good level of, no, this is an expectation. I'm actually planning for you to, your parents getting you up and getting themselves up and getting everyone in the family up and going to church on Sunday morning and doing it when everyone is tired, exhausted, and cranky and saying, no, we're going to be there. We're going to come into the church door. We're going to bring our tiredness, our crankiness there and see what meets us, because that's an important discipline.
Yeah.
But I think this question is, and I think so with so much of the youth work and the young adult work I see outside of the Episcopal Church, there is this coercive element to it where, the reason why people might be there is, well, if I'm not there, my grandmother's going to be really upset. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do things to, make sure you're great, but if that's at some point that's not going to be a fuel to get you to church on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
That's not going to be a fuel to get you to keep going about the practices and the disciplines of Christianity. And even when it is, you're not going to be doing it for the right reasons. So I think this question of what is non-coercive faith, what is non-coercive youth and young adult ministry, what does that look like and how does that work, is really different. And we have to try to name the fact that that's what we're doing. If we're saying in middle school and high school, hey, we want you to really actually start the process of deeply deciding if you want to be here, instead of waiting until your mid-20s or 30s, then that has ramifications for how large our youth programming is, how large our young adult programming is, what's success. Mm-hmm. And so it's this whole process of having people here because they honestly want to be here for some curiosity or internal mechanism is so really important. But it also means that our paradigm has shifted about what success looks like.
Yeah. Speaking on that, what I saw with my mentor, Jessica Swift, and what I've tried to continue is to just provide that inquisitive space, that loving space for people to hopefully consistently come, but to just, have that constantly available for people. And I think through that reassurance, and that community, I think that's how you provide that non-coercive environment, is just making sure that is always available, that there's no judgment in the path that you end up leading, that you just meet every question and inquiry with love. And I completely agree with what you're saying. So another program that you help to provide is Night Song. And we sadly had to miss that, the most recent one. But can you tell us how long that's been happening and a little more about it?
Yeah, so Night Song was something I came back from my sabbatical, and people had started this thing and handed it to me, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So about 25 years ago, a lot of urban Episcopal congregations that are right near like a university began on Sunday evenings, like late, like at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, filling their church completely full with incense. Like if you turn the lights on, you're going to see a haze level of incense. And getting a choir together to sing Compline, which we have in our Book of Common Prayer, but quite often singing it in Latin. And to this day, there are churches that do this, and these worship communities gather sometimes 50 to 200, 500 people in these churches and fill them in ways that no other service does. And the big caveat to all of this is that there's no preaching. Yeah. It's a little bit esoteric because it's in Latin. And the goal is just create in the church space this experience of a very, we're saying non-coercive, slightly more esoteric, Christian prayer, yes, but just sort of offered up generally for other people to come in and just sort of experience this sort of really rich part of our tradition that speaks to a lot of people that might not otherwise be interested in Christianity, would never show up for any other thing, they're not necessarily interested in converting to Christianity and might simply not be interested, but they want to come in contact with deep sensual, in the sense of there's sound and there's smells and there's like the feel of the old stone, want that experience as something. And so a lot of churches started doing that about once a month, especially during the term. And we were sitting here in Tucson, and so we have two churches, I think, that might sort of fit the bill that would generally do this, which would be St. Michael's and All Angels and St. Philip's in the Hills. So slightly more sort of high church traditional leaning, wanting to do something a little bit, out of the box. But none of them are really in urban spaces with a high density where people are just going to wander in. And the whole thing with this is that people just wander in that live in the neighborhood. The college students wander in from the dorms. And so we started saying, well, what the people who started said, well, what else might work? And one possibility that came up was out at the Mercado Annex. They have this huge outdoor space. It's really cool. And that's the center for this cultural reality, which is just happening right now, the All Souls Parade and Procession, which is on the same level. Like a lot of people do All Souls Day and the All Souls Procession and engage in it, even though in the midst of it, there's a whole bunch of Christian overtones overlaid with a whole bunch of other spiritual, religious, pagan, other influences happening. And they participate in this. It's this deeply spiritual, community, cultural, spiritual reality. And so we said, well, what if we sort of intersect on this base with our Compline services and have it sung and have the incense, but have it outside and see what happens. And I think what we found consistently is that when it works, it's really cool. When it doesn't work, it's relatively like, oh, this is a whole lot of work for not a lot of happening. And so we have this thing where we have, like, the last time we did it, it was 2 times before we did it, it was cold and it was miserable. And no one showed up because it's cold, it's miserable outdoors. Yeah. But other times we've done it and we've had 50 or 60 people there saying, wow, this is amazing. We've had conversations about the faith, etc., with people who are just wondering and going, what is this? So it's a really cool thing. It's a really different thing. And there's this, like, I think every single year we sort of say, are we going to keep doing this or not? And I think we are. I think the next one will be in March or April. Okay. We've tried doing them in February and no one shows up because every time we've ever tried to do it in February, it has been like wet and miserable. So we're like, okay, we're stopping this. Like, thank you, God, for telling us not to do this in February. And it's really interesting and it's different. And I think the whole deal is that it has a lot of fun possibilities to it, but it's also just different enough that people are like, I don't know. I also would point out that for the greater Tucson area, it is the only Episcopal worship that happens on the west side of I-10. And that's just part of what this sort of does. So it's an interesting thing. And the hope with it continues to be that it's something that, like, youth groups can go and have a pizza night out in and around the Mercado Annex and come and do compline together. Or, one of any other church group, the Daughters of the King, or the Formation for Ministry, or any of those other groups can sit there and say, here's a social opportunity where we can come together afterwards and pray. Mm-hmm. And so we're continuing to develop and work on it. But yeah, so that's Night Song. It's, as I say, it's fun, it's different, it's a little out of the box. And with out of the box ministries, it's especially ones that don't happen regularly, we're it's 3 times a year now. Okay, well, getting everyone aligned so that it works well, and praying that we chose a night that's actually people want to go outside. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember going, was it last year and a half ago? 2 years ago? Wow, it's been 2 years already? Wow. Yeah, we need to go again.
My first Access meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, it's special. Father Ben was saying, it's a very sensory experience, and it just helps get more of that higher church than you might normally get at a place like GSP or just that non-super high church type services. So I highly recommend it. Absolutely. Yes.
So when you were talking about Night Song, you mentioned All Souls Day. Is there, and then I thought of All Saints Day, is there a difference between All Souls and All Saints Day?
Yes, no, and maybe. So, it's called the old word is tridium. So tridium, it just means try. And so it's in our liturgical year, and the development of all this is its own sort of dynamic. 3 days of teaching and learning about life and death and the world. And so we have All Hallows Eve, Halloween, and a lot of that is we're sitting there and looking at death as we sort of engage it now, which is, we're afraid of it. It's this sort of other thing. We talk about ghosties and ghoulies and other type creatures that might scare us, like death scares us. And so there's this precursor of our preemptive sort of way that and it's not, of course, universal, but a lot of people approach death just in general. And then we have All Saints Day. And basically within Christianity, there's this sort of subset of people who are named that we sort of recognize as sort of set aside. There's something about this person's life, about their teaching, about their example, about something that says this person we can sort of name really went about a life that was markedly holy in a way that is a solid example for the faithful. And someone oftentimes, and so one of the things that come into this is someone who we might want to all raise up for, and saying this is someone whose example and whose life and whose discipline and whose prayers were and are meaningful for Christians to pay attention to. So on my necklace here, I have on the front of it is Mary. So Mary from the Gospels, mother of Jesus, and on the back is Saint Aloysius, who's a Jesuit, and he was a Jesuit who had a long history of he died in the midst of serving plague victims, and was generally sort of there, but sort of forgotten. The plague that he sort of provided for wasn't a repeat plague, so people sort of kept remembering him as the plagues, but he wasn't a primary saint for anything. And in the midst of the AIDS crisis, in the midst of the response to the question of, where are we directing some intercessions? If we want to look to the saints for someone to sit there and say, I need to sort of interact with a known human being who is of history, to sort of sit there and say, where is my model for prayer and life and service in the midst of what I'm facing? And they pulled up St. Aloysius from sort of this myriad of saints that we have sort of running around, and said, here is a saint for the intentions and prayers for those who are suffering from HIV/AIDS. And so, that's sort of like, and having, for me, sort of getting up in the morning and having sort of this connection with these two individuals who we think of as, humans who lived and died and went about life as us, and saying, and as pathways and entrances to understanding how to live my own discipline as a Christian is really important. And of course, in the midst of that, there are all the sort of saints unknown, people who we don't remember, but we're very much like sit in this category. And the next sort of thing is all souls. And all souls, we're not saying that these people are any less like holy, but they might be more complicated. They also are generally your personal family, friends, and relatives. People who, and a lot of people sit there and, my grandmother, both my grandparents have passed. There are a lot of times in prayer and in just life in general where I really want one of my grandmothers to be with me right now. But at the same time, I don't expect anyone to make either of my grandmother's saints for a variety of reasons. But I do want to be able to set aside a day where I can remember them, hold them up in prayer, know that their presence is with me and with others in my family. And also add to that anyone else, my family, my biological family, my chosen family, who have died that I want to set aside a time to remember and connect with. And so All Souls Day is much more this very personal connection with loved ones, with family members, maybe family members you didn't know, maybe someone whose picture your grandmother passed on to you as saying, this was my little brother. He died in the war, but I really want his name remembered and our family to remember his service to the country or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And so All Souls Day is much more about this huge history of amazing connections we have through our faith with the saints of Christendom. All Souls Day is much more, sort of the personal hearth fire of the members of your family and your friends who have died and passed. You want to have a time to recollect and be with. And it's not this sort of divisive of, you hope one day that they'll go from all souls to all saints. It's a matter of, even if, let's say one of your family members gets canonized by the Roman Catholic Church. Amazing, cool, all that. There's still going to be the very different relationship you have with them because they're your family member that you knew and loved and cared for as a family member, which is going to be different from how they'll be recorded and remembered in the midst of being a saint of the Roman Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, or noticed as such by the Episcopal Church. So
that's a really good distinction. Thank you. Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, one more. So, when you were talking about All Saints Day, does that include like Saint Patrick and Saint Valentine? Like also?
Yes. So part of All Saints Day is that there are more than 365 saints, and a lot of times there might be saints that are really important to say. So St. Patrick, for instance, is really important in Ireland. And we celebrate St. Patrick's Day here in America because of Irish cultural heritage and traditions and funsies. But like St. Patrick is not going to be a major saint in Venezuela. Not going to be a major saint in the church in Taiwan. Which isn't a problem. It's just a matter of for various obvious reasons, this individual person's narrative and story isn't one that's going to like just strike into the hearts and minds and narratives of people outside of Ireland very much. Mm-hmm. Outside of you celebrate it because it's a chance to drink and turn rivers green. But like the actual sainthood bit of it isn't going to be very major. Mm-hmm. And like the reason why I remember Saint Valentine has very little to do with his actual story as a saint, and very much to do with the fact that it's become sort of a hallmark holiday thing. So in the midst of any given day, if you take the Episcopal Church calendar, the older Episcopal Church calendar, the Roman Catholic calendar, the Orthodox calendar, and put them all there, there's probably about 8 to 20 people sitting on that list. And if you're at a church that's going to celebrate one, you might have one that you actually celebrate that day. If it's a super paying attention to all this church that thinks this is a really important aspect, they might list the rest of them in their prayers. But they're not going to celebrate them. And so part of All Saints' Day is this is a day for all the saints that we didn't directly commemorate. We're remembering you today. And the other key thing is, as I was, the number of saints we don't know, as it were, is so much bigger than the number of saints that we do know. And the saints who went about their lives in sort of a more saintly way, that no one paid attention to them because they were that much of a matter of emptying themselves out for others that they love and need, and so distant from and away from anything that might be the Instagram life of their day and time. Mm-hmm. And so so All Saints' Day is really about them as well. And so it's sort of this catch-all day for all of them, including all the ones that we might otherwise, So here I presume, celebrate St. Paul on a regular basis, because St. Paul's is one of the two churches that came together to make Grace St. Paul's. And at St. Philip's, they'll have St. Philip's Day. And at St. Michael's and All Angels, they have St. Michael's and All Angels Day. And at St. Matthew's, they have a special celebration for St. Matthew's. But quite probably, here, you're not going to celebrate St. Matthew's to the same extent you celebrate St. Paul, because he's not the patron of this specific church. Mm-hmm. And so just like that, so All Saints, and when you get to some things like in the Episcopal Church, we always talk about the mythical St. Swithin's Episcopal Church. They actually is a St. Swithin's, but it's a very esoteric saint. But we talk about All Saints' Day being a day where any and all of those saints are remembered and celebrated. Just so that we sort of can have checked every saint's box in every given year, and aren't making anyone sitting there and saying, well, no one celebrated my sainthood this year,
And then what about Saint Nicholas? Because everybody thinks of Saint Nicholas as in Santa, as in Christmas, as in putting presents under the tree and breaking into your house and eating your cookies.
Yes.
So is he a real saint?
So there was definitely a St. Nicholas, and St. Nicholas, is his feast day happened in and around the same time as Christmas. And two, one of the major stories about St. Nicholas, and the exact details about this sort of changes, and I'll skip the gorier versions, but the basic reality is part of his whole thing was providing for a poor widower farmer and his 3 daughters, St. Nicholas in his life. At least several of the stories talks about him throwing bags of gold to cover the young girls' dowries. Their basically the money they needed to be able to marry into another household and be able to have basic safety in the midst of their life and time. Where they needed another household because their father and the $3 weren't going to be able to maintain and keep them safe and everything, and bed and house and everything forever. St. Nicholas was basically tossing those under the chimney. And then there are other stories about him leaving the same things in their shoes outside their door. And so there's a few little variations on this. There's also stories about how he resurrected these daughters and the father when the whole family thought that they didn't have the ability to survive anymore in a harsh winter. So there's several different stories about that. So gift giving to children in around St. Nicholas comes out of that story of a way to, how do we get kids to celebrate and have fun at church? That's not a new question. That's an ongoing question. And so having kids look forward to days in church like St. Nicholas's Day where they get a thing, that is as old as Christendom. That's as old as any faith or religious path. And so there's that whole thing that's sort of in the air and running about of getting some gifts, kids getting gifts in and around Christmas, be it when the Magi, the 3 wise men, gave gifts to the baby Jesus. And so some kids in some Christian traditions get gifts at Epiphany, not at Christmas. Others get gifts at Christmas. Others get gifts on St. Nicholas's Day. At some point in this, kids get gifts. So that's St. Nicholas. Now, in the midst of the greater sort of European traditions, in and around the winter solstice, when things are dark, there is always some celebration of this switch towards there being longer days suddenly. The nights are getting shorter finally. Things are changing. Seasonal defective disorder has impacted everyone. We're going to celebrate this moment and give each other gifts and have a party and have fun and celebrate the fact that light is physically coming back into the world, at least in the Northern Hemisphere where everything we're talking about is happening. And so as Christianity spreads across Europe and as it interacts with, sometimes very amicably, sometimes with a whole bunch of butting heads and knives and swords and not so pretty stuff, backwards and forwards. It slowly starts talking about itself and integrating itself and being integrated into by these other things. The reason why the church upstairs looks like the church upstairs is because early Christianity was integrating with Roman, Greco-Mediterranean architecture. It would not look like this if we were in a different part of the world that oriented its architecture differently when Christianity started. Same thing with stuff like this. And so at some point, various festival things that people were doing that weren't Christian, we said, that's really cool. Or, we don't have flowers right now. We have pine balls. We're used to decorating and celebrating festivities in winter with pine because it's around and it's aromatic. We're going to fill our churches with boughs of holly, And it's because that's how you celebrate things, because that's what you have at hand to celebrate things. And then other things just sort of start integrating into this. And so Santa, Father Christmas, all of that sort of has these outside spaces, but then it just sort of integrates in, okay, how can we integrate into the conversation? And so St. Nicholas and Santa sort of get conflated. And then, about 150 years ago now, there was this idea of old St. Nick and Santa Claus, which was purely sort of this, it predates Hallmark, but it was this purely sort of like, let's have cards and let's have fun and let's celebrate Christmas secularly again. Because for a very long time, there was a whole bunch of Christians that were just very antagonistic to any secular celebration of Christmas at all. And so this sort of completely, what are the people who aren't going to church going to do at Christmas? Well, let's have the secular end of things. And that's when Santa Claus really became this other big thing. So it's all interconnected, and it's all Christianity interacting with the culture outside of it, and the culture outside of it interacting with Christianity, and people trying to figure out how do we make all this work. And some people sit there and say, absolutely not. And some people say, let's integrate and have as much fun as we can. And it all sort of, in the end, I always sit there and say, well, is some sense of loving, caring, and hope and care for the neighbor, and saying how is God, how is this present in our lives right now happening here? If so, okay, this is good. Yeah. Does that answer your sort of? Yeah. It's you asked a very, very confusing question. No, it's fine. It's just one of those things where that was a big answer to what hopefully I thought was a small question, but it's actually. It's 1,000 years of Christians interacting with the culture around them, and the culture around them interacting with Christians in a nutshell.
That makes me think of a very pertinent question, maybe. What do you say to the people who, every year when Christmas is coming, who say, we just need to put Christ back into Christmas? And it's almost that national supremacist kind of ideology. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth,
Yeah.
but what are your thoughts on that?
That's a very, it has such a sort of very peculiar American Christianity concept, where that is really what the pushback there is against Christianity living and breathing and walking and being alongside other faiths that are given sort of equal time, as it were, in the midst of things. And I think a good example like that was, people were talking about very consistently recently is the Archbishop of Canterbury made a statement about Diwali, about the Hindu festival of lights, on All Hallows Eve, on Halloween. And people were talking about why is it that my company, which gets upset at me for saying Merry Christmas, is sending out a everyone have a joyous Diwali cultural awareness moment email today. And so we're already in the let's put Christ back into Christmas sort of section. And part of this goes back to, what we were having, what I was mentioning, 100 years ago, there were a whole bunch of churches that were very antagonistic to this secular celebration of Christmas because it was supposed to be a very and even sort of the sort of stuff that a lot of people might do at their home otherwise, because it was supposed to be this this is a feast. You come and celebrate it. You go home. You might do a little sort of very basic stuff with your family, but it's not supposed to be this sort of big pageantry thing that we see now. But really, when we see Christ in Christmas thing, what it is people want to make the celebration of Christmas sort of hegemonic, the all-powerful thing that is pervasive to every single aspect of our society on December 25th and in the weeks heading up to it. And so firstly, I think that distracts from the fact that there's this entire season of Advent, of preparation, where we sit there and say, how can I be better ready to welcome Christ into the world? It also sort of looks at the fact that Christmas is this whole series of festivals and joyous occasions that we look at as Christians. But more importantly, Christianity is about the process of God emptying the God self out of God and becoming a very vulnerable, small, little child in a manger to two poor parents who were not going to have an easy life. And putting the Christ back in Christmas would mean all of us sitting there and saying, what would it be to not be in power? What would it be to specifically sit there and let what is Christmas quietly happen in the midst of the lives of Christians and allow that sort of quietness and that celebration and the joy we have permeate out from this sort of humility and this emptying out of ourselves of power and control into the world around us. That would really, but what Christ in Christmas would be this overwhelmingly humble, basic services of our own celebration, and letting that be a contrast to whatever society is doing, be it being really good or really bad. Not this sort of now everyone must obey us and do Christmas. And it's just the reality of that. The average person you meet on the street isn't going to be celebrating Christmas in our sense of a word anymore. They might very well be celebrating something else. And, it's much easier to have a conversation with someone about what you're celebrating in your life if you give them a chance to celebrate something that's happening in their life and not just tell them, you must celebrate with me. I'm like, that's not how you invite people to your birthday party. It's my birthday. You will come here and you will enjoy it. I'm like, that's probably, your friends are probably not going to want to be there. And if they're there, their smiles will probably not be authentic. Same basic thing with Christmas.
I appreciate that answer for sure. That's a really good perspective on it. And as we're getting closer to the holiday season, I think that's good to keep in mind. And I guess just be aware of when we hear people in our lives say that. So I'm glad you started bringing that up. Thanks, Lila.
Sure.
Okay, so we got about half an hour
Mm-hmm.
left. So I want to give you space to answer, to do the thing that we talked about, which was answering similar questions as other spiritual leaders. So the first one is a very personal question. When did you receive your call? Was it an easy or difficult choice?
If you were going to ask when did I first think that I might have, like, I think you're mentioning here like vocation to ordained ministry.
Yes.
So I would definitely say that, like, in middle school and high school, there were bits and pieces of things in my life that was very much, wanting to be in the midst of Christian community, Christian life, and in some way, shape, or form, this was going to be part of what I am doing, was just really clear in my life, and the idea of various things that clergy people do was of interest to me, and sort of like the work that clergy do. This was the 1990s in the Episcopal Church, and so there were two big things happening there. So firstly is that the Episcopal churches that I was generally part of were relatively not LGBTQ inclusive. And also in the 90s and 2000s, the Episcopal Church was just disinterested in what we call now what we've called for a long time, but primary vocations, which is a youth member start showing signs they might be interested in being a leader in the church and seems like they might have the capacities to be a good clergy person. We're going to lift up that youth person, say, hey, this is something you should look into and be doing. When they get into college, there's a college chaplaincy that helps them discern and look into this. There's people who are excited about the idea of a new generation of clergy. And then they're going to sponsor and do things so that this person can go from their undergraduate degree into seminary and start off like when they're get ordained at the age of 24 and like get sort of their feet on the ground of what is it like to work, how do I learn how to handle people, like manage church management, all that things in the field, in situ, with the church, under proper mentorship and direction. Mm-hmm. None of that existed. We're sort of recreating that now in the church. We're getting better about that in the past decade. None of that existed in the 90s and the 2000s. They'd actually made a purposeful plan to dismantle all of that in the 80s. Wow. And so I had two big issues here. So the first issue was that at that point in time, we were just starting to actively have some places in the church where LGBTQ were being ordained in a sort of healthy, dynamic way. I was aware that it sort of existed. I had no access to any of those communities or even figuring out how to find them. The internet wasn't that big back then. And so for me, ordained ministry, one, meant staying in the closet. And two, it was not something that there wasn't any pathways for any of us to go to. And I had many of whom are now actually ordained, but in my crew at my campus ministry, we had several people try to do this ordination thing, and pretty much all of us get somewhat similar pushback in the early 2000s. Mm. So all of that was sort of happening. And so I would say I went off to college with let's just do the other plan. And the other plan was my family's plan, which is a good plan, which is agricultural science or agricultural business. Mm-hmm. Do you want to do accounting numbers all day, or do you want to do farming numbers all day? I sort of said, I'm going to do farming numbers all day. I got a bachelor's of science in chemistry degree, which I really loved. And I realized that I was in my final year at college. I have to try something else. Mm-hmm. And that's when I actually sort of actively tried to start working with the church and doing ministry. I went up to Labrador, Canada, and worked for the English Church of Canada up there with the fishing villages, and did a ministry sort of internship with them. Came back to the States, did Episcopal Service Corps. I mentioned that earlier. But at that point, the next sort of hiccup is I think I'm called ordained ministry. But where I was doing ordained ministry was I really wanted to do college chaplaincy. I'd really like the ministry that really called me, the clergy that really spoke to me, and the work that really spoke to me was school chaplaincy, sort of out of the box ministry groups. I helped found sort of this missional was all the word back then. Worship community in Boston called The Crossing. And I was also doing tons of LGBTQ community organizing at this point in time. And basically, that doesn't fit your average person who's going to go and do parochial ministry, working in one of our, the average church that, even if they're LGBTQ inclusive, they're not like working 20 hours a week for an LGBTQ marriage equality campaign and human rights law, LGBTQ inclusive. Like that's not typical. It's not the sort of, and the talking bits they saw me was like me talking in front of our legislature about trans bathroom access. And they're like, and me using scripture to talk about that. And they were sitting there saying, well, that doesn't sound like a sermon that will fly in the average parish. I'm like, well, it's not a sermon to a parish. It's advocacy to a legislative session. But all of that sort of balanced. There was a lot of tension because I wasn't coming in saying, hey, I want to be in a parish as a parish priest. And also it's like I'm, relatively, very actively sort of liberation theology political. And so those two things combined just sort of, that was a jumpy road. I think the commission, one of the words in the commissional ministry, which is the people who oversee the discernment process for the diocese, when they sent back to the bishop, is like, we don't know quite what to do with this person, but we think seminary might be good for them. That's me paraphrasing it. But that was the sense I got from reading this stuff. Like, oh, well, that's not negative. I am getting to go to seminary, but also it's like, I could use a little bit more affirmation there, please. And so I would say I started discernment when I was studying abroad in England at the University of Sussex in the Diocese of Chichester. They said, we think something's happening. Go home to your home parish in the States and see what happens. Come back to us if you maybe want to. Get a job out here in England. I had something lined up. It fell through. I was in the Diocese of North Carolina under Michael Curry back in the day. And they sort of said, we want you to keep exploring. We want you to keep doing internships and see what it is. And so then I found this job up in Canada. And I told the Diocese of North Carolina what I was doing. I wasn't official with them yet. And they said, this sounds like a great idea. Go do this thing. And then like the odd thing is that back in those days, I started doing all this stuff and doing all these various projects. And I came back to like the next discernment process. I was living in Massachusetts at that point in time because I just was doing the Episcopal Service Corps, following where the church said go. At this point, they're saying, well, you're jumping around a whole lot of dioceses, and you also have already like run a church. And we didn't sit there and say that'd be a good idea for you to run a church as a lay person because this other diocese hired you to do this. This is a problem. And I'm like, I literally am a 20-year-old who's literally been just going and doing what the church will hire me to do. Yeah. But because I've been doing so much work and because I've been being hired as a professional now as a lay person for 3 or 4 years and now doing discernment, like the issue is like, well, this hasn't been under the auspices of you being properly formed for ministry, which was its own sort of hang-up. So all of that sort of, so it was the process of once I sort of figured this is what I want to do, there was about 14 years and a whole lot of sort of conversations with various dioceses and various people around that, which was overall very good and very formative. Living through it was very, very frustrating because there was not this overall vision within the Episcopal Church for how are we going to raise up young people to be ordained ministers. And we gotten better at that. but we still have a lot of hiccups and issues, and there's still a lot of what I would say as a church-wide thing. There's just a whole bunch of we are dropping the ball.
Yeah.
So,
do you feel like, in a more recent sense, do you think that it's begun to grow in a better place?
It's gotten to a much better place. One of the big deals about that is that we didn't have a choice. If we didn't start looking to people in their 20s and 30s for clergy, we would not be having any. And so there was this sense where like desperation ended this sort of like almost like basically from 1981 to like 2020, that 40-year period. This like sort of like we're not doing this ended. So that was really good. But a lot of that is desperation. And I think we also, one of the biggest issues is, unlike I would say the Anglican Church of Canada, where there's an overall vision and there's an overall expectation, there's an overall, this is really how we're all doing it, and no matter where you are, it's the same process and the same things and the same expectations, and we can sort of sit there and say, where do we need people? Here in the Episcopal Church, it's almost every diocese sort of almost fends for itself, and there's not this sort of, hey, maybe we have a bunch of people that are interested in ordained ministry on the Eastern Seaboard. If we tell them, hey, we can do this, but we need to talk about the fact that the jobs are in the Midwest. Are you game for that?
Yeah.
But that's not the conversation we have. The people on the East Coast say, well, we have too many people discerning. We don't really need you. Not thinking about the fact that actually what we need is we need a whole bunch of clergy. We just don't necessarily need more clergy in New York City or Boston or Atlanta. Yeah. We need people who are young, who might be interested in going anywhere and everywhere for a job and profession they love, saying, hey, yeah, we're interested in talking to you, but realize the fact that in 3 years when you get out of seminary, we might be sending you off to, not even like remote rural Midwest, but we might be sending you off to a major city in the Midwest where there is a symphony, an LGBTQ community, and everything else you could possibly ask. It's just in part of this country that you've never thought of moving to.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Wow. I had no idea that's not something that was coordinated between
no.
Wow.
And there is this thing where, like, if you go through a diocese, there's an expectation that you serve them for 2 years as part of the whole process. And that's a really beautiful and good thing. And there's a reason why we do that. But there's also a reason why it might be a really good idea for, dioceses that are in desperate need and don't have anyone they're raising up to sit there and call out and say, hey, we'll take over those 2 years. We'll pay you back some of the money you helped pay for their seminary if you can just get us people out here to realize how amazing it is to be someplace and to serve a church in an area. And maybe you'll come out here and you'll realize the fact that, the East Coast isn't, or the West Coast isn't everything it's cracked up to be. That there's actually a reason to love, some of our small rural towns here in Arizona that have flourishing communities that need clergy and actually can fund a clergy position. But people are like, I don't know if I want to move to the Southwest or the Midwest or something like that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to have a switch to more broader topics. We've got about 10 more minutes, so if you want to spend, I'll ask 2 of these.
Okay.
If you've got 5 minutes or so for both of them. Okay, so very broad question. What are your thoughts on the concept of karma and how that relates to anything you want to bring into it?
Yeah. So karma. So I think one of the biggest things, and this is especially within Christianity, even like liberal, progressive, like people who are like everything's cool, pluralistic Christianity. We have an issue with karma. Let's say it's karma. Let's say it's chakras. Let's say it's tarot. Let's say it's whatever else under the sun. Let's say it's Kabbalah. We have these very sort of we have this way of being very ephemeral with it. I would say that Avatar: The Last Airbender gave a pretty good actual summary of what are the chakras, in a way that's not bad.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't be talking about the chakras if the basic way we have it is sort of what we've heard in the air, maybe what someone who may or might not be trained in teaching this said at a yoga class, and what we heard from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like, our understanding of tarot should not come from, I remember seeing Mother Cleo's tarot divination infomercial at 1 o'clock in the morning in college. Like, that is not the proper foundation of how we talk about tarot. This is not the proper foundation of how we talk about karma. If what basically we have is the television. I always tell people, do you want people to think about Christianity and the Episcopal Church by how it's shown on television, where they can't get our vestments even right? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, well, don't think about Kabbalah, don't think about tarot, don't think about chakras, don't think about karma in that way. Like, if you're going to talk about deeply and meaningfully. And so, only when you look at what is karma, in the midst of this, what we have is what we think about is trying to answer the question of how do we be well-rounded? How do we come to a full awareness of what being a human is like? How do we engage and live and go about a life where ultimately we've learned everything we need to learn? And so my teacher's teacher from my yoga teacher training, spoke of karma as, before we are born, and this is where sort of karma does this all on the front end. Before we're born, we're sitting there and we've had other lives before, because this is a reincarnation theology philosophy, and we're out of balance. We need balance to our whole being. Not our understanding of who we are, caught up in time and space right now, literally disconnected, unintegrated from who we are, but our whole self is saying we're still not complete. They're saying we need to experience. And you're doing that, and they're asking that question without any of our sort of sense of what is painful, what is not painful, what is good, what is bad. But with this sort of innate sense of, I just need this counter harmony in my life. And that story that you might get might be a very tragic section of that melody, or it might be a very sort of powerful thing. And so you come into this world because you're sitting there saying you need this balance, and there's someone whose life is starting, and that life might be very, very short or very, very long. That's part of what you might be looking for in this balance, that you're going to go to, and you're going to have this life to bring balance to who you are in a greater sense outside of time and space. And so when you come into this world, the one option is that you're going to encounter this thing, this the amazingness and the tragedy, whatever the dynamic is. And so the question then is, okay, how do I move on from this? How do I reach integration and completion without necessarily this sort of being smacked in the head with it on an Idle Tuesday? And then in Hinduism, you start having the spiritual disciplines of meditation, of right and proper living, to overcome this cycle where you're trying to just randomly integrate by living a series of random lives, to actually living a life of purpose and integration now, and overcoming and finding that balance within this life in the here and now, and burning the seeds of karma so that you can find that balance. And I would say the big question is, how do we find balance in our lives? Which is a question every single person should be asking, and that every single faith generally answers in some way, but often has the exact same set of spiritual disciplines you take up on a day-to-day basis to get there. So we talk, instead about burning karma, we talk about theosis. We talk about orienting our lives towards what God wills and God desires for us, discerning with God what path we're supposed to lead, not having an idle life where things just hit us idly on a random Tuesday and we have to sort of react and learn from them. And so instead of having a disciplined life where we are better able to be responsive to things coming into our life and not reactive. And then we look at the end of life, there's this process of purgation that happens so that we, with the love of Jesus, in the midst of coming into the resurrection, find the balance that we might have otherwise have missed along our path. So really, when we're looking at karma, we're looking at another way of trying to address this issue of balance. And if we're looking at either this the same way, what we get to is that because by discipline and by purging and by awareness and by hope for balance and by being more wholly present and responsive in a space, we can overcome the issues in our lives that are just going to otherwise rear up their heads and throw things off. So that's sort of my sort of conversation about karma, is that, it's and with all of these things, like, stop sitting there and saying, well, this is what I believe and this is what you believe. Sit there and say, what question are we trying to answer with these beliefs? And what does it mean for our day-to-day life? And then sort of approach things from that sort of viewpoint and actually have a conversation about how these different things might give you insight into the questions that you're yearning, because that insight is what's going to allow you to be a better disciple of whatever path you're walking. And for me as a Christian, consistently has been then say, okay, wow, I can be a better Christian now because I actually learned what this person was trying to do. I didn't just react to it because I saw, something on an infomercial at 1 o'clock in the morning one day and presume that had all the answers about this thing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I had Lila walk over here and write down a question she would very much like to ask.
Okay.
So the question being, and this is, we talked about this in Sunday school today. What do you think the most important commandment is?
Well, I'm not gonna forego Jesus on this one, which actually, if it wasn't All Saints Day today, it actually is the gospel lesson for today. Is that the first commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your soul. And so let's just start with that one, and I want to pivot. The people sit there and they. There's two clauses here, and the clause that I really want to I sit there and say, start focusing on, is are you able to love in a way that includes your heart, your mind, your body, your strength, and your soul? And so the first commandment has this caveat, the fact that we're supposed to be trying to figure out how to do that. We're supposed to be trying to figure out how to have this integrated life of love where our heart, our soul, our body, and our mind are all working together in a loving, integrated way. And that by doing that, we're going to be able to love God, and that God is an orient for us to do that is much safer than saying, I'm going to commit all of my body, my heart, my mind, and my soul to the pursuit of money, or to having a romantic relationship with this specific person. Are so many other things that we might be really, really interested in, that if we're going to talk about, for my life's commitment, where is my love going to be oriented towards? Let's choose God. Let's choose this greater being. Let's choose something that's truly beyond us, that isn't just something like money or a love affair or whatever. Not that, wanting food and shelter is bad. Not that wanting a romantic partner is bad, but just that can't necessarily be your overall life goal, because eventually, and a lot of scripture talks about this, love affairs will end and then the actual relationship begins. Stock markets or whatever will rise and fall, and you'll be without money and you'll be flush with money at various parts of your life in various ways. And so that's the first sort of thing. And the second, of course, is love your neighbor as yourself, and love yourself as your neighbor. And people like to really harp on the fact that you have to love others like you love yourself, forgetting the fact that a good part of the population has a lot of trouble loving themselves. And a lot of times people have to sit there and say, well, if this was something else, what would I be doing to support them? And other people really need to focus on the question, if this was me, what would I want other people to do for me? And then orient towards doing that for someone else. And I would sit there and say that, how all of these things, and the other key thing if you'll pay attention, is that the first commandment mathematically is a total sum game. Love the Lord your God with everything you have, and then more love.
Yeah.
And what I always like to stress in the midst of that is that there's this foundational way that if you are entering into meaningful, loving relationships with yourself and with others, that is part of the process of loving God. That is part of the everything that goes into loving God. And that for a lot of people, the way to build up a more deeper and richer love of God oftentimes is focusing on love of self and love of neighbor. And then using that as a foundation to launch into a deep, meaningful love with God. Other people are going to sit there and have easy access to this love of God, and like people are like, oh my gosh, and myself is like, oh my gosh. But then that love of God can come into teaching you to love yourself and teaching you to love others. And where any one person fits in this sort of vertical and horizontal reality of loving God and loving neighbor and loving self is different, but you figure out where you are in it, and then you work with where you are to get to where you're not. And those two things, that's basic spiritual discipline talk. And the biggest question is, can you make this spiritual discipline talk and not make this, just exterior religiosity?
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's gonna pretty much wrap it up. We've got a minute, so we'll go ahead and thank you so much for coming today.
Glad to be here.
This was very insightful, and we very much appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. There's not really many events this month at GSP. We're gonna start doing Christmas pageant get-togethers and figuring that all soon, but I'll have more info on that later. But other than that, I think we all just want to say thank you and
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
It's been good to be here.
Yeah, of course. All right. So that's us signing off, everybody. Bye.